Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. This week we're discussing the food crisis in Africa and in Yemen. We had reported last week over 100 people died from hunger and diarrhea in Somalia in 2 days. And the government, apart from seeking intervention from the international community, called on citizens to also contribute to dealing with the problem. Farmers were encouraged to get back to the farms, and the government promised to work to reducing the price of fertilizer. The UN says the world is facing its largest humanitarian crisis since 1945. And that's because, according to its new report, more than 20 million people face the threat of starvation and famine. The areas worst hit, according to the UN report, are Yemen, Somalia, South Sudan, and Nigeria. Surprised? Don't be. If you have been observing closely the impact of the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast, then you must have seen this coming. Thousands of people have been displaced, many yet to go back. So who's there to go to the farms, and what will they plant? Besides, how safe is it to get to the farms? The UN says at least 75,000 children are at risk of starving to death in northeast Nigeria, and another 7.1 million people in the country and the neighboring Lake Chad area are considered food insecure. But it's not the first time this year that the UN has called attention to the impending crisis.
The facts are stacked. 1.4 million children could starve to death this year if nothing is done to curb the situation. $4.4 billion would be needed by July to avert disaster. And if nothing is done, more than 20 million people across 4 countries mentioned in the report could face starvation and famine. As it stands, 1.8 million people in Nigeria face severe food insecurity, 4.9 million in South Sudan, 2.9 million in Somalia, and 14.1 million in Yemen. Put all the figures together, one could be looking at an entire nation at risk of famine. All the countries mentioned have one common factor: the presence of war or conflict. Generous pledges made at the Oslo Conference on the Lake Chad Basin by 14 donors for a total $672 million have only yielded $458 million for humanitarian action this year. Back in February, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said $4 billion would be needed by March this year to help nearly 20 million people at risk of starvation in the 4 countries. Citing armed conflict and climate change as part of the reason for the food emergency, Guterres led a call for a $5.6 billion in funding for humanitarian operations in the 4 countries this year, of which $4.4 billion is needed by the end of this month to avert a catastrophe.
All counterparts promised to facilitate sustained access and respect IHL. Yet all parties to the conflict are arbitrarily denying sustained humanitarian access and politicize aid. Already, the humanitarian suffering that we see in Yemen today is caused by the parties and proxies, and if they don't change their behavior now, they must be held accountable for the inevitable famine, unnecessary deaths, and associated amplification in suffering that will follow. The situation is worse than it has ever been. The famine in South Sudan is man-made. The parties to the conflict are parties to the famine, as are those not intervening to make the violence stop.
He also said that women and girls are disproportionately affected by the crisis, and nearly 500,000 children are suffering acute malnutrition. Just back from his visit of the countries affected, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan and Yemen, the UN humanitarian chief Stephen O'Brien warned of the looming catastrophe. Addressing the UN Security Council, he stressed that the international community had the responsibility of preventing and ending further misery and suffering in the countries at risk of famine.
To be clear, we can avert a famine in Somalia. We have a committed, clear, new president, a humanitarian and resilience track record, a detailed plan. We're ready, despite the incredible risks and danger. We have local and international leadership. We have a lot of access. Now we need the international community, at the scale of you, the donor agencies and nations, to invest in Somalia. It's life-saving, but we do need those huge funds now. We stand at a critical point in our history. Already at the beginning of the year, we are facing the largest humanitarian crisis since the creation of the United Nations. Now, more than 20 million people across 4 countries face starvation and famine. Without collective and coordinated global efforts, people will simply starve to death.
He described the situation in South Sudan as worse than it has ever been, and that the leadership on both sides of the conflict in Yemen promised to facilitate sustained humanitarian access.
All 4 countries have one thing in common: conflict. This means that we, you, have the possibility to prevent and end further misery and suffering. The UN and its partners are ready to scale up, but we need the access and the funds to do more. It is all preventable. It is possible to avert this crisis, to avert these famines, to avert these looming human catastrophes.
He also said the UN and its partners were ready to scale up their response, but need the access and funds to do more to avert the looming catastrophe.